The door creaked open to a motel room on the Oregon coast. Two cell phones lay side by side on the nightstand, their screens dark but charged. Suitcases sat unzipped, clothes scattered across the carpet, wallets and credit cards untouched, a camera left behind, memory card still inside. Every belonging remained. Yet the couple who owned them had vanished. For the motel owner, it was a morning he would never forget. The room looked lived in, but eerily abandoned. For the first police officer on scene, it was the strangest report he had ever filed. No sign of a struggle, no trace of escape. To the families back home, it was the phone call that shattered their lives. David Miller, 34, and his wife Emily Carter, 31, had been married less than a week. The night before, they walked barefoot along the beach, laughing under a crimson sky. Emily posted a final line on her blog, "Tomorrow will be even more beautiful." But tomorrow never came. The newlyweds were gone, as if the tide itself had swallowed them whole, and 10 years later, a battered leather suitcase would resurface online, rekindling a mystery America has never been able to solve. On a warm June afternoon in 2005, inside a modest Protestant church tucked away in Portland, family and friends gathered to witness the beginning of a new life. The stained glass windows threw splashes of color across the wooden pews, and the faint sound of a piano echoed through the air. David Miller, 34, stood nervously at the altar in a dark suit, his hands clasped tight. He was no stranger to stress. His job in IT often demanded long hours and late nights. But in that moment, he looked like any other groom, hopeful, slightly overwhelmed, and ready to promise forever. Beside him, his father, a retired police officer, sat straighter than usual, his stoic face softening as he watched his only son. Later, he would recall whispering a silent prayer, "Lord, give him the strength to love her as much as I loved his mother." Then the church doors opened, and Emily Carter entered. 31, with a gentle smile and a bouquet of white lilies, she walked the aisle in a simple gown. Her older sister, a nurse, adjusted the hem of the dress as tears streamed down her cheeks. She had always been protective of Emily, and now she felt the bittersweet mix of joy and worry, handing her sister into a future unknown. The ceremony was intimate, stripped of extravagance, but rich with sincerity. When David and Emily exchanged vows, their voices trembled, yet carried conviction. Guests later said the moment felt almost cinematic, as if the world had paused for their words. That evening, Emily posted a short entry on her blog. She wrote about the laughter, the prayers, and the way sunlight danced through the stained glass. She ended with one line, "Sometimes happiness is simple. A promise, a family, and a new beginning." For those who were there, it was a day of joy. For those who would look back years later, it became the last memory before a story of love turned into a riddle with no answer. The road from Portland to the Oregon coast wound through pine-covered hills, a ribbon of asphalt cutting toward the Pacific. Emily Carter leaned her head against the window, eyes wide with childlike wonder as the landscape opened up. David Miller, one hand on the wheel, kept sneaking glances at her. To him, the honeymoon wasn't about the place. It was about watching her dream unfold. They arrived at Cannon Beach in the late afternoon. The ocean stretched endlessly, silver blue under the fading sun. A modest family-run motel stood a block from the shore. The owner, an elderly man with weathered hands, greeted them warmly, handing over the key to a corner room on the second floor. The room was plain. Beige walls, a small TV, a bedspread patterned with seashells. But from the window, the Pacific filled the horizon. Emily's face lit up. She whispered, almost to herself, "This feels like heaven." As David carried in their bags, the owner later recalled thinking how ordinary they looked, yet how deeply content. He noticed Emily running her hand across the window pane, as though she could pull the ocean closer. "Enjoy your stay," he told them. He would never forget those words. That evening, they kicked off their shoes and walked barefoot along the sand. The June air carried a chill, but they didn't care. Emily snapped photos of the waves, the seagulls circling overhead, and finally of David, his figure outlined against the setting sun. Then he held out his phone, pulling her close, capturing the two of them together. Behind them, the sky blazed crimson, the tide whispering at their feet. It was, unknowingly, their final photograph. Locals who saw them that night remembered a couple lost in their own world. A waitress at a diner nearby said they stopped in briefly for coffee, their laughter soft but constant. They looked like every newlywed I'd ever served, she recalled years later. Happy, glowing, untouchable. Back in the motel, Emily opened her laptop. On her blog, she uploaded a few pictures, titling the post, "A New Beginning, by the Sea." She wrote, "Tomorrow will be even more beautiful. With the one I love, every place is paradise." For her sister, who read the entry the next morning, it was just another sweet update. For investigators, looking back years later, it became Emily's final digital footprint. A timestamp of joy just hours before silence. As the night deepened, the town grew quiet. The Pacific rolled against the shore, constant and unbothered. In that little room with seashell bedspread and a window to the ocean, David and Emily seemed safe. But by sunrise, the room would be empty, their belongings untouched, and their names etched into one of the most haunting mysteries the Oregon coast had ever seen. By 9 o'clock, the streets of Cannon Beach had quieted. The small tourist town, so lively in the afternoon, now hummed with only the faint sound of waves and the occasional car along the coastal road. Neon signs from a handful of shops flickered in the misty air. For David Miller and Emily Carter, it was their first full evening as husband and wife away from home. At 8:50 p.m., a security camera inside a convenience store just off the main road captured David walking in. He wore a plain t-shirt and shorts, his hair slightly mussed from the salty air. In the footage, he picked up 2 cans of Coke and a small bag of chips. The clerk, a college student working his summer job, later recalled how ordinary the man seemed. He even told me, "Have a good night," with this little smile. Nothing about him looked worried or strange. That would be the final confirmed sighting of David. Meanwhile, Emily was in their motel room. She opened her laptop and logged into her blog. At 9:15 p.m., a post went live titled, "A New Beginning, by the Sea." She uploaded a photo, the couple, barefoot in the sand, the sky painted in red and gold behind them. Her words were simple but radiant. "Tomorrow will be even more beautiful. With the one I love, every place is paradise." For her sister back in Portland, reading it later felt like a blessing. For detectives who would study it years afterward, it became a haunting timestamp. The last trace of Emily's voice. Around 10 p.m., a tourist claimed to have heard a man and woman arguing near the pier. He couldn't see faces in the dark, only the sharp rise of voices and what he thought was the sound of a woman crying. At the time, he dismissed it as a couple's spat. Later, he would wonder if those were the last cries of David and Emily. Back in the motel, the glow of the laptop screen eventually dimmed into a screensaver. 2 cell phones rested side by side on the nightstand, as if waiting to be picked up again. Outside, the waves continued to break against the shore, indifferent, eternal. For the motel owner, who lived downstairs, the night passed in silence. He heard nothing unusual. No slamming doors, no hurried footsteps, no shouts. To him, it was just another evening at the coast. But by morning, when checkout time came, and the door remained locked, the ordinary would shatter. Looking back, investigators would call this window the few hours between David's last appearance on CCTV and Emily's final blog post. The vanishing point. Somewhere in those moments, in the quiet of a coastal town, something happened that no one could explain. And by dawn, a story of love had become a riddle that still haunts Oregon today. The sun rose pale over Cannon Beach, light spilling across the Pacific and painting the sky in muted pinks. For most visitors, it was the promise of another summer day. For the owner of the small seaside motel, it began like any other morning. Brewing a pot of coffee, setting out brochures in the lobby, and preparing to knock on doors for checkouts. Room 204 was due out by 10. By 9:30, no movement, no sound. The owner, a man in his 70s, shuffled up the wooden stairs and rapped gently. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller?" Silence. He knocked again, louder. Still nothing. By the 3rd knock, a faint unease prickled his spine. He had run the motel for decades. Newlyweds usually overslept, but they always answered eventually. With hesitation, he fetched the master key. The door creaked open, and what he saw made his stomach twist. Suitcases were unzipped on the floor, clothes spilling out. On the nightstand, 2 cell phones sat side by side, both charged, both abandoned. A camera lay beside them, lens cap off. Wallets stuffed with cash and credit cards rested untouched. The bed showed signs of use. Sheets rumpled, pillows indented. But the room itself was silent, hollow. No broken glass, no forced entry, just emptiness. The owner later recalled standing in the doorway, frozen, whispering to himself, "Where did they go?" He hurried downstairs to call the police. By the time the first officer arrived, over 12 hours had passed since David was last seen on CCTV. The critical window investigators call the golden hours was already lost. The officer noted the strangeness immediately. Travelers don't leave phones, wallets, and identification behind. It was like they'd stepped out for a minute and never came back, he said. News traveled quickly through the quiet town. Other guests watched from their balconies as police taped off the room. A maid whispered that she'd seen the couple the night before, smiling, holding hands. To her, the sight of their belongings left behind felt like walking into a ghost story. Emily's sister, back in Portland, received the call later that morning. She dropped everything at the hospital where she worked and drove straight to Cannon Beach, praying the whole way that it was a mistake, that maybe they had gone hiking or simply missed their checkout. But when she arrived and saw the two phones sealed in evidence bags, her hope collapsed. From that moment, the case shifted from a honeymoon to a mystery. A young couple, married less than a week, vanished from a locked room with every trace of their lives left behind. No footprints on the sand, no witnesses on the street, no calls from their phones, only silence. And as officers stepped out of the room, one of them muttered words that would echo through the years. People don't just disappear. Not like this. By mid-morning, the small parking lot outside the seaside motel was crowded with patrol cars, search and rescue trucks, and a handful of curious onlookers. Yellow tape flapped in the breeze as investigators moved in and out of room 204. The air smelled of salt and seaweed, but for the officers on scene, the atmosphere felt heavy, unnatural. The lead detective stepped into the room and scanned the belongings once more. Wallets untouched, cell phones side by side, camera resting on the nightstand. This doesn't fit the pattern, he muttered. If it was a robbery, nothing's missing. If it was a runaway, who leaves their lifelines behind? He ordered the room sealed and evidence bags filled with anything that might hold prints, soda cans, scraps of receipts, the laptop still humming faintly on the desk. Outside, the motel owner sat on the steps, head in his hands. They came back around 9, he told officers. I saw them walking upstairs. That's the last I heard. His voice shook with guilt, though he had done nothing wrong. By afternoon, the search expanded. Volunteers combed the beach, some forming lines across the sand, others scouring the jagged rocks of the jetty. Search dogs paced back and forth, noses low, but the trail faded near the waterline. Divers entered the surf, disappearing beneath waves that pounded relentlessly against the shore. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights skimming the coastline. At the pier, a tourist recalled hearing raised voices around 10 the night before. A man and a woman, he said. Could have been them. I remember thinking she sounded upset. Investigators pressed for details, but he could offer little more. Just shadows and sound in the dark. The first night, the command post glowed with floodlights. Maps of Cannon Beach were spread across folding tables, red circles marking areas already searched. Officers tracked tides, calculating whether bodies could have been pulled out to sea. Yet, as one Coast Guard diver pointed out, if they went in last night, something should have surfaced by now. Nothing had. Back in Portland, family members gathered around phones, desperate for updates. Emily's sister drove down again, joining search parties with flyers in her hand. David's retired father called in old favors, urging detectives not to give up. Find my son, he said, his voice breaking. Find my daughter-in-law. Please. But by the third day, hope began to wane. Every cove, every trail, every bluff had been searched. The forest beyond the town was combed by volunteers with flashlights, their voices echoing Emily and David's names into the trees. No torn clothing, no footprints, no trace. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. At a press briefing, the lead detective faced reporters. Flashes from cameras lit his weary face. We are treating this as a missing persons case. At this time, we have no evidence of foul play, but we are not ruling anything out. His word, measured and official, did little to comfort the families watching from the back row. To the public, the story was just beginning. Honeymoon couple vanishes without a trace. To investigators, It already felt like chasing ghosts, and as the ocean continued its endless rhythm, one truth grew clearer with each passing hour. The longer the silence, the deeper the mystery. Within a week, the disappearance of David Miller and Emily Carter had spread far beyond the quiet streets of Cannon Beach. National outlets picked it up, splashing headlines across screens. Newlyweds vanish in Oregon. No trace found. News vans crowded the small coastal town, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters swarmed the motel parking lot, pressing microphones toward police spokesmen and grieving relatives. At first, the attention felt like hope. Heidi, Emily's sister, thought, if the whole country is watching, someone will remember something. She gave interviews, holding up her sister's photo with trembling hands. But quickly, the tone shifted. One tabloid published a story claiming David had lost thousands in cryptocurrency investments. Runaway groom, the headline teased. His co-workers, blindsided, admitted he had been stressed at work, but none believed he would abandon his new wife. Still, the damage was done. Strangers flooded online forums, painting David as reckless, selfish, even dangerous. For Emily, whispers of an old relationship emerged. A former boyfriend told a reporter she had called him briefly before the wedding, her voice nervous. Overnight, blogs speculated, did she have doubts about marrying David? Was she planning to disappear with someone else? Emily's family recoiled at the suggestion. She was the happiest we'd ever seen her, her sister told a local paper. Don't turn her into a stranger. The police, meanwhile, struggled under the glare. Reporters demanded answers. Was this foul play? A lover's quarrel gone wrong? A staged disappearance? One detective later confessed. It felt like the case was being tried in the court of public opinion before we had any evidence. In Cannon Beach, business owners bristled at the media circus. Tourists came not for the scenery, but for the mystery. People posed outside room 204, snapping photos like it was a roadside attraction. The motel owner, who had once welcomed honeymooners with warmth, now faced online accusations. Anonymous commenters suggested he knew more than he admitted. Some even hinted he had harmed the couple. They ruined him, a neighbor recalled. He carried that guilt until the day he died. For the families, the rumors were unbearable. David's father, a retired officer, broke his silence at a press conference. His voice shook, but his words cut sharp. My son was an honest man, a responsible man. Stop dragging his name through the mud. Bring us facts, not fiction. The plea made headlines, but only briefly. Emily's mother, too frail to face cameras, watched the coverage from her living room. Every wild theory. Insurance scams, forbidden love affairs, staged deaths. Struck her like another wound. She told her pastor, it feels like they're stealing my daughter from me all over again. What began as a desperate search for answers was now a storm of speculation. In the noise, the truth slipped further away, and in the midst of it, one question lingered louder than all the rumors. If neither David nor Emily walked out of that motel room, then who? Or what? Took them? For the Millers and the Carters, the days after the disappearance blurred into one long nightmare. Every phone call, every knock on the door made their hearts leap, only to fall again when it wasn't news of David and Emily. David's father, a retired police officer, carried himself with the discipline of a man trained never to show weakness. But behind closed doors, he unraveled. He paced through the night, replaying the details over and over. If they'd called me sooner, he muttered to his wife. If I'd driven out there myself. The guilt hollowed him, and within 2 years he suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. His doctor told the family stress had triggered it. His last clear words to his friends were always the same. Find my boy. Emily's mother spiraled into depression. Once a lively woman who loved hosting Sunday dinners, she now barely left her bedroom. The news channels became both her torment and her lifeline. She watched every update, even as the wild theories shredded her spirit. At night she clutched Emily's childhood quilt, whispering prayers through tears. Eventually, her doctor diagnosed her with severe anxiety and depression. It was Emily's sister who refused to stop moving. A nurse by profession, she worked long shifts and then drove 2 hours to Cannon Beach on weekends, stapling missing posters to lampposts, handing out flyers at bus stations. Locals remembered her walking the shoreline, calling out her sister's name as if the waves might answer. She joined every missing person support group she could find, listening to families who shared the same ache. If I sit still, she told one volunteer, I'll break. For the Millers, the family name became a shadow they couldn't escape. Neighbors meant well, but whispers followed. "Do you think he killed her and ran?" someone asked within earshot. David's mother stopped attending church for a time, unable to bear the stares. Yet in her small kitchen she set a place for him at the table, whispering, "You'll be hungry when you come home." Years passed, but the pain calcified instead of fading. Holidays turned into hollow rituals. Empty chairs at Thanksgiving, unopened gifts at Christmas. Friends eventually stopped asking for updates. Even the police grew distant, their calls less frequent, their language clinical. No new leads. Case remains open. But for the families, the absence was louder than any answer. They lived in the in-between, where hope and grief collided daily. To give up meant betraying their children. To keep hoping meant bleeding endlessly. One night, at a candlelight vigil organized by neighbors, Emily's sister stood holding a flickering flame. The ocean wind threatened to snuff it out, but she shielded it with her hand. Her voice shook as she whispered to the crowd, "They deserve to be found." Not as headlines, not as rumors, but as human beings. The struggle wasn't just against time or silence. It was against forgetting, and for families like theirs, remembering became the only way to survive. 10 years had passed. The case of David Miller and Emily Carter had long since faded from headlines, filed away as another unsolved mystery on America's long list of the missing. For their families, though, the ache never dulled. Emily's sister carried it with her every day. Into hospital shifts, into quiet drives home, into nights where the silence felt unbearable. It was an ordinary Tuesday lunch break in 2015 when the twist arrived. She sat in the break room of the hospital, scrolling half-heartedly through eBay listings. A thumbnail image stopped her cold. A brown leather suitcase, edges worn, handle cracked. She leaned closer, heart hammering. It looked exactly like the suitcase she and Emily had picked out years earlier in New York City. She clicked the listing. More photos appeared. The scuffed corners, the torn lining near the zipper, and then her breath caught. The faint, almost invisible etching inside the flap. David and Emily. She recognized her sister's handwriting instantly. Her hands trembled so hard she nearly dropped the laptop. The seller, a graduate student outside Portland, agreed to meet. Sitting across from him at a cafe, she clutched the suitcase as if it were alive. The young man explained he'd bought it at a flea market years ago. "I didn't think anything of it," he said, nervous under her stare. "It was just an old bag." He insisted he knew nothing more. Detectives were alerted immediately. For the first time in a decade, there was tangible evidence. Something touched by Emily herself. The suitcase was sent to the lab. Technicians dusted for prints and found faint impressions matching Emily's. Tiny grains of sand lodged in the seams were analyzed and confirmed to match Cannon Beach. But there was something else. Forensic chemists discovered traces of lime dust embedded in the leather handle. That substance, common in old mines and quarries, was almost non-existent on the Oregon coast. The discovery suggested the suitcase had traveled inland, possibly hundreds of miles from where David and Emily were last seen. The revelation reignited the case. Media outlets ran the story. Missing Newlywed's suitcase resurfaces after 10 years. Theories flooded back into the spotlight. Had someone taken them? Did they survive and try to start over elsewhere? Who had carried the bag from the beach to a flea market? For Emily's sister, the suitcase was both a gift and a curse. Holding it, she felt her sister's presence more than she had in years, but it also tore open old wounds. "Why the bag?" she asked detectives. "Why now? And where are they?" For investigators, the suitcase was a puzzle piece without a picture. It proved Emily and David's story wasn't finished, but it also multiplied the questions. Who had touched it after them? Why had it surfaced only now? And most haunting of all, if the bag had traveled, had they traveled too? The case was once again alive. But in mysteries like this, every answer seemed only to sharpen the shadows. When the suitcase surfaced, detectives reopened the Miller-Carter file with renewed urgency. For a department accustomed to cold cases collecting dust, the discovery felt like a second chance. A new task force was assembled. Some younger investigators seeing the case for the first time, some veterans returning reluctantly to a mystery that had haunted their careers. The suitcase sat in an evidence room under lock and key. Officers handled it with gloves, studying every scratch, every fiber. The forensic report was both promising and maddening. Emily's fingerprints confirmed authenticity. The Cannon Beach sand tied it to the scene, and the lime dust pointed inland. Yet beyond that, the trail vanished. Detectives fanned out, revisiting old leads. They combed flea markets and pawn shops across Oregon, hoping to trace the suitcase's journey. But transactions were cash, records non-existent. Vendors remembered little. "I might have sold that bag years ago," one man shrugged. "But I couldn't tell you who brought it in." The paper trail was a ghost. They re-interviewed the cafe seller, the graduate student. Polygraph tests cleared him. His story never wavered. He'd simply bought an old suitcase for cheap and forgotten about it. "It was just gathering dust in my closet," he told them. "If I'd known," his voice trailed off under the weight of guilt he didn't deserve. Meanwhile, analysts scoured Emily's old blog for hidden meanings. One post a month before the honeymoon caught attention. "Sometimes I dream of leaving everything behind and starting over somewhere no one knows me." To her sister, it was just Emily's poetic style. To investigators, it fueled speculation. Had the couple staged their own disappearance? Or had someone manipulated that longing? Detectives pursued the lime dust clue. Geological maps pointed to abandoned mines in eastern Oregon and parts of Nevada. Teams visited several sites, sifting through rubble, interviewing drifters and locals. Nothing surfaced but rumors. A bearded man and a short-haired woman living near a quarry in 2007. A couple keeping to themselves in a trailer park, gone by the next spring. Each lead dissolved into haze. The longer the investigation stretched, the more the momentum ebbed. Reporters who once camped outside police headquarters turned to fresher stories. Families who had clung to the suitcase as a beacon of hope watched the light dim again. Emily's sister described the feeling in one interview. "It was like watching them disappear a second time. The bag gave us proof they'd been real, proof they'd been here. But then, silence. Just silence again." Inside the task force, frustration grew. "Every door we opened led to another locked door," one detective admitted years later. It was like chasing shadows across half the country. Eventually, the special unit disbanded. The suitcase was sealed back in evidence storage, labeled, cataloged, and left to wait. For the families, it was a cruel reminder. The suitcase proved the story wasn't finished. But the lack of answers proved it might never be. And in the long corridors of law enforcement, the case of David Miller and Emily Carter slid back into the category it had known for a decade: unsolved. 2 decades have passed since David Miller and Emily Carter vanished on the Oregon coast. The world has moved on. New headlines, new tragedies, new mysteries. But for their families, time has not softened the wound. David would be 54 now, Emily 51. In photos that resurface online each anniversary, they remain forever young, smiling newlyweds on a windswept beach, frozen in a life that never aged. For the people who love them, the question has never been if they are alive, but where. David's father did not live to see this day. He passed away 5 years earlier, his health broken long before by grief and guilt. His last words, whispered in a hospital bed, were his son's name. His widow, now frail and stooped, clings to a ritual. Each morning she sets out an extra plate at breakfast, murmuring, "You'll be hungry when you come home." Neighbors see her in the yard, moving slower, but never missing that quiet routine. Emily's parents have aged into silence. Ishidi, her mother, lives in a care facility, drifting between clarity and forgetfulness. On lucid days, she asks the same question. Has Emily called yet? Her father, battling illness of his own, rarely leaves his chair. Together, they embody the quiet erosion of hope. Only Emily's sister remains fiercely active. Now in her 40s, with streaks of gray at her temples, she has become a voice for the missing. She runs social media campaigns, speaks at vigils, and volunteers with families of the missing. Her message is always the same. They are not just cases. They are people, and people deserve answers. The beach where the newlyweds disappeared has changed too. What was once a modest stretch of sand lined with motels has become a resort hub, crowded with tourists and high-rise hotels. Few visitors know the story. At the far end, half hidden by dune grass, stands a stone bench with a small plaque, in memory of David and Emily. Lost but not forgotten. Sometimes strangers leave flowers. Sometimes the bench sits alone, overlooked by passing families with ice cream cones. For detectives, the case remains open but dormant. The suitcase sits in an evidence locker, its secrets locked as tightly as the day it was found. Files are yellowing. Names of investigators have been crossed out and replaced as retirements roll in. One young officer admitted quietly, It's become more legend than case, but legends don't comfort families. And for the sister, every passing year brings a sharper truth. "I don't pray for them to come home anymore," she told a local reporter. "I just pray to know what happened. I need to know where they are, so we can finally lay them to rest." On the Oregon coast, the waves still break endlessly, reshaping the shore with each tide. Time erases footprints, washes away traces, covers secrets in sand. But memory resists. As long as someone remembers David and Emily, their story refuses to vanish completely. And so, 20 years later, the mystery endures. Half tragedy, half unanswered question, suspended between grief and hope. Some mysteries end with an answer. Others fade quietly, their questions buried with time. But the disappearance of David Miller and Emily Carter has become something else. A mirror held up to the fragility of love, the cruelty of silence, and the endurance of memory. For those left behind, the pain was never just about loss. It was about living in the space between hope and despair, where every day could bring either closure or another layer of confusion. Families of the missing know this better than anyone. The not knowing is a wound that never heals. Emily's sister once said it best: "Death is something you can grieve. Disappearance is something you have to live with, every single day." And yet, their story is not only about sorrow, it is also about the resilience of love. David's mother, setting an empty place at the table. Emily's sister, walking the coastline with flyers. Strangers who leave flowers on a lonely bench at Cannon Beach. These acts testify to something greater, a refusal to forget. In that refusal lies a quiet kind of faith. The belief that remembering matters, even when answers never come. For the public, the case reminds us of a deeper responsibility. Disappearances are not just headlines or puzzles to speculate over. They are lives interrupted, families broken, and communities scarred. To honor those stories is to step beyond curiosity and into compassion. It calls us to strengthen search systems, support grieving families, and ensure that silence never drowns out truth. As the tide continues its eternal rhythm, erasing footprints from the sand, the mystery of David and Emily remains. Perhaps someday a new clue will surface. Perhaps their fate will forever be untold. But what endures is the legacy of love they left behind, and the reminder that to remember is to keep them alive in spirit. And so, to everyone listening now, may we not only be moved by this story, but also carry its lesson forward. Treasure the people beside you. Stand with those who grieve. Refuse to let the missing vanish from memory. If this story touched you, we invite you to keep walking with us. Click like, share this video, and subscribe to Silent Traces. Together, we can keep these voices alive and continue telling the stories that remind us of the power of love, faith, and hope, even in the darkest mysteries.